BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning at Congregation Or Chadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week, we're continuing our special summer series on the women of the Hebrew Bible with the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, as told in Numbers 27, 1-11, and 36, 1-12. We marvel at these 5 young women who stand before Moses and the whole people of Israel to advocate for their right to inherit property after their father dies without any sons. When Moses takes their claim to God, God responds simply by saying, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right," and then modifying the Torah for all time so that women can inherit property if they have no brothers. We talk about the courage of these women to work within the system to advocate for themselves and for all women within the patriarchal society of Israel. We discuss God's unquestioning acceptance of their perspective and full acknowledgement of their interpretation of the Torah, even as they point out that God had overlooked some issues in the original giving of the law. We also recognize that this text does not go as far as we might wish, as the system of inheritance in ancient Israel remains fully patriarchal, with this one minor modification in favor of women. But then, change is slow and never happens as quickly as we might like. In that sense, the daughters of Zelophehad give us encouragement to continue in the struggle for women's equality even still today. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy. How are you this week?
I'm doing all right. I'm enjoying being in this series on women in the Hebrew Bible. And it's just like, I don't know, it's like playing through my head. You know how that happens when you're studying a text. And it's just like, I don't know, it's like, you know, the things in the corner of your mind in the shower, it's really created some more space for me to think about how I, as a woman in modern America, interact with the stories of women in the biblical text and where they're hard for me and why they're hard for me and where they're empowering for me. And yeah, it's been interesting.
That's really interesting, Amy, because obviously you relate to this text in a different way, a more embodied way than I do. I'm just curious, like what kind of stuff is inhabiting your mind?
As in how? That makes it sound like some kind of like parasite.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, at the beginning of the summer, when it was Shavuot, around the time of Pentecost, I taught a class on the regendered Torah, which I've mentioned a couple times over the course of this year, that flips all the genders in the Torah and sort of tells the story that way. And I taught it at a community that is more conservative than my home community.
Yeah.
So I was aware that people might really like have a heart attack. This was a pretty radical thing to ask them to think about.
Yeah.
And as I was doing that, as I was preparing for like how I could wade them into these waters, I was thinking about why it is sometimes not enough for me to have the stories of the women that we have in the Hebrew Bible. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what's hard for me is that I have been, like it or not, socialized in the ways of particular ways of womanhood, I don't know, that really sort of involve like kind of staying within the lines, like not overturning the apple cart or whatever. You're supposed to follow the rules. You're supposed to follow the rules. And most of the stories of women in the Hebrew Bible that sort of rise up to the level of, we're going to tell a story about a woman within this patriarchal society, they don't play within the rules because the rules don't give them any space to do anything. Right. So we read a lot of stories of women that are really uncomfortable for me because they have to be quote unquote manipulative or quote unquote tricky or whatever, because that's the only option. And I recognize that like theoretically, but it is uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
This week we get to read a really different story of women finding power in the world that I feel like, again, for better or for worse, I don't know how I feel about the fact that I feel this way, but these daughters who go about trying to create change legally, who go through the steps that you would go through to get something like officially overturned. There's no trickery, there's no deception, there's no costumes or,
Right, yeah.
I don't know, any of the things that might be involved in some of the other stories. And I just love that there is this story in there too.
Yes.
It's easier for me as a modern woman, I think, or as I'll just say a modern person having been socialized the way that I was. But it also is it's just nice to have a range of like, here are some ways that power as inhabited in a female body, I don't know if that phrase made sense syntactically, but I hope you know what I meant, that ways that can look.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to be reading this story today of the daughters of Zelophehad.
That's so interesting, Amy. I appreciate your putting it that way. And while you were talking, I was just thinking about, because I guess it was 2 episodes ago now, we were talking about Tamar, who has to, manipulate the system in some pretty dramatic ways to carry on her legacy or to live up to her obligations even. Then next time we're going to talk about Rahab, who also has to be pretty deceptive in some ways. Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting. And I don't know how far to push this, but these women that we're talking about today, the daughters of Zelophehad, are Israelite women, and those women seem to not be. And so I think one of the things that we're talking about is the different ways that women can interact and act. We're also talking about, I think, at some level, the intersections of gender and ethnicity. And is it the case that women who are not part of the dominant ethnicity have to exercise or find power in other kinds of ways around the edges where these women have some access because of their ethnicity? I don't know how all that plays out.
I mean, that's a really interesting question. It may be more often the case. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's across the board the case because there are tricky, quote unquote, tricky Israelite women too. Yeah, but that's a great point. It's not like we all have a singular identity, and that's and that's what we get,
And you keep coming back to that, which I really appreciate. Is all women are not the same woman, which I think is it's obvious at one level, but also when you do a series on women of the Hebrew Bible, the temptation, I think, is to say, look at woman's experience. And it is not that at all. You're right. It's the experience of different women in different social locations at different periods and different circumstances. And so the ways in which they interact are quite diverse. And I think, and that's really helpful to bring out. So I think that my natural way is to say Zelophehad. And so I'm going to do that. I did a video, I do these Bible study videos, and I normally say Hagar. But in this video, I picked up your pronunciation and said Hagar.
Did it confuse you?
And I had to keep correcting myself in this whole video. And so I sounded completely insane. But I don't like to go back and, I can't edit video very well. And so I just run them straight through in one thing. And so at the end of the video, I had to be like, y'all, I'm sorry. I tried to say Hagar. But it always comes out Hagar. And so that's why I sound crazy in this video.
It's hard when you have more than one pronunciation in your head. This is a text that I learned. We do talk about it in the Jewish community, but not as much as we talk about Hagar. Yeah. So I still have Zelophehad in my head also.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that because this is a story that I didn't really know until I don't even know when, in graduate school sometime.
Yeah.
Maybe. I was pretty far in my biblical education before I ever really thought about this story, the daughters of Zelophehad. And so I was going to ask you if that is also true in the tradition that you were raised in. And it sounds like this is not at least a front and center text.
It's not a front and center story. No, it's, it's in the Torah, so it's in the annual readings, but it's not like the story is of the matriarchs.
Yeah, right.
Of Genesis and Exodus. Those are the stories. And here, it's a story, but Numbers is such an interesting book because it sort of goes back and forth between story and really boring parts where they're just counting people and
Yeah.
and some legal stuff and this is sort of an intersection of story and legal stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't get top billing.
Yeah. All right, so this is the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, which we are taking in two parts. The main narrative comes in Numbers 27, 1 to 11, and then it gets picked up again in Numbers 36, 1 through 12, which is not really, the daughters of Zelophehad are not exactly characters in that second story, but the implications of what has happened in the first story are kind of worked out. They actually show up again in Joshua 17, which we might mention briefly at the end of the podcast. So we are transitioning from the story of Miriam to this story. We've only moved, we were in Numbers 12 and now we're in Numbers 27. And so I don't know, in the context of this Women of the Hebrew Bible series, are there things that you think we need to clarify or talk about before we enter into this text?
I mean, I don't have a lot that I feel like we need to do in terms of just like the plot catch up. We're still, we're wandering in the wilderness and really working out the details of what it looks like to live as a community. And so that, has involved a lot of people speaking out against each other and getting in a lot of trouble, as we saw with the story of Miriam and Aaron and Moses last time. We've had some other rebellions violently put down by God. But I think that it just feels like this is the unfolding of like, great, you have that huge theophany and now you have to run that through. Like, what is that actually going to look like on the daily? And that's what they're figuring out. And that's what this story is. Like they have encountered a situation that is not addressed specifically in the laws that have been given, and they're asking, what can we do?
I think that's exactly right. There is also one sort of enormous difference between Numbers 12 and here, which may not be overly relevant for our conversation. But back in Numbers 13, Moses sent spies into the land of Canaan to spy out the land and say, can we go? And the spies came back and said, oh my gosh, those people are ginormous. And we look like grasshoppers standing next to them. And then the people are so afraid that they don't want to go to the land. And so the Lord in Numbers 14 says, you know what? I'm just going to kill all you guys and start over with Moses. Yeah. To which Moses says, no, that's a terrible idea. And so God says, fine, I'll just make you wander in the wilderness for 40 years until this generation dies and the next generation can enter the land. So in Numbers 12, we were still in the sort of, the scenario was the Israelites were coming out of Egypt and they were just going to go into the land. In between there, we've sort of gotten diverted, literally, so that now there's a 40-year wandering. And so this story sort of takes place in the midst of that 40-year wandering somewhere. I don't know how much difference that makes to the actual story.
No, but that's really helpful. And the immediate context before we pick up in chapter 27 is going to tell us that the generation that went into the wilderness has all died, except for Caleb and Joshua, the sort of loyal spies,
right,
and obviously Moses.
Yes.
So, our text today is dealing with the issue of like inheritance and what does inheritance look like between the generations, and that's pressing now.
Exactly.
Yeah, they have these ancestral lands that have been assigned once they enter the land of Israel, and they actually have to figure out the continuity between generations for those things.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to pick up in Numbers 27, and I'm reading in the Common English Bible. The daughters of Zelophehad, Hepher's son, Gilead's grandson, Machir's great-grandson, and Manasseh's great-great-grandson, belonging to the clan of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came forward. His daughters' names were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chiefs, and the entire community of the entrance of the meeting tent, and said, Our father died in the desert. He wasn't part of the community who gathered against the Lord with Korah's community. He died for his own sin, but he had no sons. Why should our father's name be taken away from his clan because he didn't have a son? Give us property among our father's brothers. Okay, I'm just going to stop there because that's just such an interesting kind of situation that we have found ourselves in. You were talking just a little bit about the situation a minute ago, but can you just help us understand, like, what is the issue that is being raised here?
Yeah, so here's how I understand the issue. Lands have been allocated to each sort of tribe and each clan, and it is meant to be a permanent allocation. I know last summer we talked about the Jubilee year. I don't know if we talked about it at all this year, but it is so much meant to be an enduring allocation that even if you sell the land, let's say because you're in terrible debt, you don't have any food, you need to sell your land, every 50 years it reverts back to the original, clan that owned the land. And we are in a society where everything passes through the men. Like we started the book of Numbers counting all the Israelites, and guess who's not counted, Bobby? Right?
Yeah.
It's only men, really men of a certain age that are counted in the system. And so the question that has come up is, if a man, the father, who has land dies without a son, but he has daughters, what happens to the land?
Right.
And these daughters, I mean, it's pretty amazing that they come forward with this at all. I mean, they come forward they come forward in front of Moses and the priest and the chiefs and the whole assembly. These people who are not even counted in the census, and say, hey. And they don't say it's because we deserve it. They say sort of in the name of our Father, like this is how the system was designed.
Yeah.
But the system can't work the way it was designed. And so there's a gap that you need to fill.
Yeah. Now, I really love that one verse that you were pointing to, verse 2. They stood before Moses. And you're like, okay, all right. Eleazar the priest. And you're like, oh, there's two of them. The chiefs, and then the entire community. It starts with they came to Moses, and then by the end they're standing in front of the whole nation of Israel. I know. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's like the camera's panning out or something. But no, it really is kind of an exceedingly brave thing that they do.
Yeah. How did they even know that they had standing to do this?
Yeah.
How did it, in some ways, it really sort of turns on its head my sort of imaginings of what it would have been like to be a woman in that society, because they're no shrinking violets.
No, not at all.
They claim rights within the legal system, but they bring a case to the Supreme Court.
And I also appreciate that I like that way of saying it, because it's not, we had talked about it a minute ago as they are raising a question about inheritance. But by the time they get to the end, it's a very clear request. Give us property among our father's brothers. Here's the rationale, which you have given us very nicely. But this is the solution too. This is what we think you should do, which is a really strong claim. Not just hey, we've been thinking about what, what are we supposed to do? Yes. It is this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Amy, in the biblical text, it is not particularly common to encounter women whose names are given.
Yeah.
Here we have 5 of them, all named.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me? I don't know what to say about that exactly, but that seems like something.
It's crazy even reading that, some of those long lineages that are given. You would never even know people had daughters, right, let alone the name of their daughters.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have anything super smart to say about it, Bobby, but it is really striking. And I named my daughter for one of these daughters.
Yeah.
I named her Hagla. No, I didn't name her Hagla.
I'm so curious if there are people named Hagla out there.
No, my daughter's name is Noah. And I just have to say, because this drives me crazy, In my translation, it spells it Noah here.
Yes.
Is that how your
mine
translation?
does too in the CEB.
It is a different name. It is a totally different Hebrew name than Noah in the ark. That is Noach.
Right, with a
and
chet.
This is Noah, which
With an
usually
ayin,
when it's written in English now, people don't put an A on it. They just spell it Noah.
Yeah.
That one has come to be a common name in Israel. I don't know about these other ones. I may have heard of a Tirza, but I digress.
No, that's important. That's important.
What are these Bible names for English speakers?
Yeah, I love that that's who you named your daughter after, because it's such an interesting model of sort of feminine empowerment, as you were saying at the beginning, and like a woman who is able to stand up for herself in a patriarchal culture. I've always thought that was a really lovely name.
Her middle name is someone who definitely was not interested in the rules.
No. Yeah, the combination of those two names.
It's a combination. You got to know when to play which card.
So you were talking about the male genealogies, and I mean, this text starts that way, right? They start with Zelophehad, and then the son of Hafer, the grandson of Gilead, Machir, and all the way back to Manasseh. And so you sort of think this text is just going to exist in that man's world because it starts out that way. And then we get the names of these 5 women. It's sort of, I don't know, for me, it disrupted that sort of sense of, oh, here's another male lineage. It is a male lineage, but now here we get the names of these 5.
But it does sort of set this, it reminds you, like it really sort of puts you in, this is the context in which we're in. Everything is set up thinking about male lineage.
Yeah.
And now guess what? You have 5 sisters.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, this line in verse 3, our father died in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't part of the community who gathered against the Lord with Korah.
Mm-hmm.
He died for his own sin. Can you talk a little bit about they're clearly trying to distance him from one sort of reason people have died and associate him with some other reason. Can you sort that out at all?
I mean, gosh, that's a good question, Bobby. So the story of Korach's rebellion is, Korach and some friends and ultimately like a whole big group of people come to Moses and Aaron and say, like, does the Lord really only speak through you? Like, why do you set yourself up as sort of holier than everyone else? Surely he sort of is suggesting this democratization of holiness, of, ability to receive information from God, of sort of leadership. It does not go well. The earth opens up and swallows all that Korach and all his guys. But now that you raise that question, it is interesting that they don't want these women to be associated with someone who is suggesting that this whole system is corrupt and everything should be democratic. Heaven forbid, right? But there's a certain radicalness about that maybe this text is intentionally trying to distance them from.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That story, by the way, that Amy was just talking about is in number 16, if anybody wants to go back and take a look. But that makes a lot of sense to me, what you're saying, Amy, that the text is trying to say, look, these are not part of the rebellious faction that test Moses' leadership. They are part of the community that recognizes Moses' leadership. And within that recognition of his leadership, they have raised this legitimate question about how this law is going to work. And so this is not an act of like overturning the system.
Right.
It's an act of working within the system to try to deal with some ambiguities about the status of women in inheritance.
Yeah.
That seems really important.
Yeah.
I still like that it's like, it's not that he died of natural causes. He died for his own sin.
He had his own problems, okay? Yeah. He had his own problems.
I mean, presumably that's a reference to he was part of that generation that was afraid to go up into the land. And so that whole generation died for their own sin.
I assume that's what it's referring to, but that's funny.
He died just like everybody else. Yeah.
He was no saint. Okay.
All right. So the way they frame their question is, why should our father's name be taken away from his clan? So what they're asking for is land given to them, the daughters. The way that they frame it is in order to preserve the name of our father in his clan.
Bobby, it just goes back to like all these stories we've been reading in the Hebrew Bible about the importance of having a descendant, like the importance for this system. This is the closest you get to any kind of sort of eternal life, is that it passes through the generations. And this is a really sort of strangely concrete, aspect of that, is that your land passes through the generations. Yes. And if his land is just divided up and given to other people, then, it's as if he never existed. I mean, it's not really, but that's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. We want him to have this enduring legacy, and this should be part of that.
Yeah. All right. So they have made this case before Moses and the others. Is there anything else you want to say about this little section before we look at how Moses responds?
No, I'm ready.
All right. So picking up then in verse 5. Moses brought their case before the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, Zelophehad's daughters are right in what they are saying. By all means, give them property as an inheritance among their father's brothers. Hand over their father's inheritance to them. Speak to the Israelites and say, if a man dies and doesn't have a son, you must hand his inheritance over to his daughters. If he doesn't have a daughter, you will give his inheritance to his brothers. If he doesn't have any brothers, you should give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, you should give his inheritance to his nearest relative from his clan. He will take possession of it. This will be a regulation and a case law for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses. It is interesting to me, I think important, that Moses doesn't simply make a determination about what's the right thing to do, given what's already been said, but he brings it to God, and all of this new regulation is God's words. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, it's really striking because it's not, Moses has really portrayed part of the strain of being the leader of these people is that he has to adjudicate all these cases. And there are, various situations where he's trying to set up different systems of judges to adjudicate cases. But the fact that he doesn't say anything. He just brings it directly to God. And that to me is a recognition that the women have brought a case that it really requires something new to happen. Like it requires some novelty within the system that they have. There's no clear way to handle this.
Yes.
And they've brought a good and novel question.
Yes.
And I love that God just says very matter of factly, oh yeah. Yeah,
yep.
They're right. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
And just like that, the whole system of inheritance is expanded and clarified. And it's just sort of oh yeah, they're right. We're going to have to make the following adjustment. And even though God is God, this wouldn't have happened if the women hadn't brought the case.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So these 5 daughters have, of their own initiative, changed the divine law, basically. God has added to or amended the initial giving of the Torah based on their observation.
Yeah.
Feminist scholarship has, for a long time, tried to convince the rest of the scholarly world that women can see things in the world, in the text, in the law that men kind of overlook, which I think is that is absolutely true. It's so interesting. I sort of read this text as an early version of that, which is to say all these men who gave the law and the God who seems to have interest in men in this part of the text anyway, they just overlooked this whole issue. But the women, because of who they are and because of their own experience and because of how they experience the male line of inheritance, are able to see something that the men in the story can't see. And so what the men in the story do and what God in the story does is acknowledge the legitimacy of what they have seen and then adjust accordingly. To me, this text is really beautiful in that sense, acknowledging the women's experience and the rightness of their observation, making adjustments as needed.
And it's I don't know what I was going to say interesting, but that's such a boring adjective. Like it is not lost on me that the way they make their case is that it's their father's name who will be lost. They never say we deserve this land.
That's true. Yeah.
And certainly it does not wind up with equality.
Yeah.
Like it winds up with like, if there are no sons, then it can go to the daughters. And if there are no daughters, it just reverts back to the totally male system.
Yeah. This little section of text, after that beautiful shining moment of give them the land, then it ends with this whole long list of men who get the land if. Yeah.
Right. If there's no sons or daughters. So, I mean, so yes, it really in a lot of ways like reminds me of how jurisprudence works even now, or at least maybe should work, is that it's iterative. Like it's small steps, and they bring forward that something needs to be adjusted, and it is, but it doesn't, break open the doors of equality. It just, it moves the, what do people say? Moves the dial? What do people move?
Moves the dial. Expands, shifts the Overton window.
Oh, I don't know that one. Whatever. It it takes us forward just a little bit, and that's really good and important and maybe realistic. But yeah, it's not like some kind of big sweeping thing. It's not like what Korach was suggesting when he was like, overturn the system. Let's have democratic access to revelation. And that was not God's plan at that time.
Yeah. So Amy, you're coming really close to ruining this story for me.
Sorry. Okay. This story's great.
And so but it's worth talking about. Like, you're exactly right. This is an incremental move. It still basically preserves the male lineage. It makes an exception based on case law, or at least a case that comes out of concern for a male's legacy. And so this is a feminist moment in the text. And it is also a feminist moment in the text that ultimately is preserving, with a minor modification, what is a patriarchal system. And so I think it's just, I mean, I don't know quite what to do with that. Like, I don't want it to diminish this contribution that they have made, because it's an important contribution. But maybe this text is so approving of them because they didn't actually challenge the system.
Well, they didn't. You're right. They didn't challenge the whole system. But we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. They were able to actually move the needle. That's what you move. You move the needle.
You can move a dial, too. They were able to
move the needle. Huh? You can move a dial, I guess.
But needle.
Korach did not move anything.
That's true. He got swallowed by the earth.
He got swallowed by the earth.
I mean, so in that sense, he moved like a lot of things.
The whole plates of the planetary. Yeah, he did.
So Dr. Google tells me that the Overton window is an approach to identifying the ideas that define the spectrum of acceptability of governmental policies. And so you can shift the Overton window by saying something really like radical.
That was a much more like specifically relevant phrase.
I was trying to decide if it was, I guess it is governmental policy. Yeah,
It is governmental policy. It for sure is. But I mean, I think that the other, Bobby, tell me if you can think of other situations before this where this has happened. But I think the other thing it does is, like, in addition to this particular case and the role of women, it's just the idea that, like, you can bring a question to Moses about the legal system that Moses doesn't know, and brings it to God, and God will say, like, oh yeah, you're right. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So here, let's fix that little thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's radical.
Yeah, the commentary that I was reading by Thomas Dozeman, prepping for today, he says that there are 4 cases in which Moses has to go and ask God for a new ruling. Mm-hmm. One is what to do with somebody who blasphemes the name of the Lord in Leviticus 24. One is what to do with somebody who's traveling and can't celebrate Passover on the proper day in Numbers 19. And then one is a question about what happens to someone who breaks Sabbath law in Numbers 15. And so this is one of 4 cases in the biblical text. So, I mean, like, that is significant that this story and these 5 women have raised an issue that rises to that level. That's important.
Yeah.
I think it's also important that the answer here is not just give these 5 women the land of their father. It is now it becomes the new law of the way things are to be done in the community of God, which is if any man dies and doesn't have a son, you must. And then so this question that they have raised ripples on beyond themselves to other and future women as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, Amy. So that is the section, the initial story of the daughters of Zelophehad. Is there anything else you want to say about this part in Numbers 27?
I don't think so. I mean, I say this every single time, I think. I wish I could know the women better.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I can try to imagine that the way that they were raised or the way that they stuck together or the way that, but something in the world or something deep in themselves gave them the idea that they could do this.
Yeah.
And there is no real, there's not much in the world that would have given them that idea. Because as you're saying, it was very rare that this happened really at all.
Yeah.
But this was really courageous and really, I don't even know the word for it. Like, I mean, chutzpahdik, I don't know, but just like something had to give them the idea that this was even a possibility.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yeah.
Whatever else was going on in the world at that time, these 5 women said this is what should happen. It should be an option for us to inherit this property.
Yeah.
And we're going to fight for that.
I really love that. Yeah, I wonder if there's 5 of them together, which give one another courage, maybe.
I would imagine so.
Hi, everyone. It's Bobby here from the BibleWorm podcast. We hope you're enjoying our special summer series on women of the Hebrew Bible. Amy and I are grateful to you for being part of the BibleWorm listening community. If you're looking for more BibleWorm resources, we hope you'll check out our Patreon at patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast. There you can sign up to receive early episodes, weekly liturgies, and video Bible studies that go along with the podcast. Or for just $4 a month, you can support our ongoing work and help keep this podcast freely available to the public. Plus, you'll receive a snappy BibleWorm sticker that will make you the envy of all your friends and family. See patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details. And now, back to this week's episode. All right, so when we talked about this with the BibleWorm Collaborative, one of the questions that came up was, but then so what happens in the next generation? Isn't the land just going to get incorporated into some other male's line? Which is...
Oh, wow, they anticipated the question.
They did, which is a question that does not seem to be anticipated right here, but it does come up later in Numbers 36. So I'll pick up there in 36:1. The leaders of the households of the clan of Gilead, Machir's son and Manasseh's grandson of Joseph's clan, approached and spoke before Moses and the chiefs, who were the leaders of the Israelite households. They said, "The Lord commanded my master to give the land as an inheritance by lot to the Israelites, but my master was also commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, to his daughters. If they are married to someone from another Israelite tribe, their inheritance will be taken away from our household and given to another tribe into which they marry. Then it will be taken away from the lot of our inheritance. At the Israelite Jubilee, their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they were married. Then their inheritance will be taken away from the inheritance of our ancestral tribe." Okay, can you just help us understand what the issue that is being raised here is?
So when the ancestral land is allocated, it's not allocated, it's allocated by tribe. And so like the tribe of Manasseh has this much land and the tribe of Judah has this land and, whatever. And then it's sort of subdivided within that.
Right.
Into, clans and then individual families. That's one piece of background. Another piece of unfortunate background is that the existing system in Israel, especially once a woman gets married, it really doesn't recognize that woman as a person who can like own her own things and sort of function in the world without the, express blessing and permission of her husband. She's kind of seen as property of her husband.
Yeah.
There are laws that require care for your wife, but there is no sense at all of equality or autonomy of the woman, really. And so if the woman has this land, once she marries, anything that was hers, now she is sort of under the heading of her husband. And so now all this stuff belonged to her husband. And if her husband is not in the same tribe, then it's the same issue that we sort of started with, which is that we, at the end of the day, the land inheritance needs to stay within the tribe to which it was originally allocated.
Yes.
And this would mess that up.
I like the way you said that there at the end, that the solution in Numbers 27 sort of defers the underlying problem one generation into the future, which is good. But now we've got the same problem, which is now what's going to happen with the children of these daughters and what tribe they belong to. That was really helpful. What I'm really interested in this text is the solution, which comes in the next section. Is there anything we should say about the problem that has been raised? Like, it's a legitimate problem that's being raised by these tribal leaders.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely a legitimate problem. And you were just saying earlier that I was kind of ruining this story for you. It's like, it is a reminder to me that although this overall is a good ruling for women, I think, in this telling, it sort of raises up. But at the end of the day, what's important is the land.
Yes.
And the land inheritance.
Yes.
We're not doing this because it's fair to the women.
Yes.
That's right. It's still working within the system that is ultimately patriarchal and ultimately focused on the importance of this land inheritance. So, if you were super excited about the last chapter, then this chapter is sort of like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All of this is within
I
a
see what's really important. Yes, it's all within a larger system that is problematic.
It's problematic, and also there's a really lovely idea that I think Leviticus 25, the Jubilee text, gives us, that the land belongs to God. It is not yours. You do not have control over it. It is God's. And that people living on the land are sort of like tenants. Like you get to have the land and work the land and raise your family on the land, but you do not own the land. And that God has in mind sort of a distribution among the people. Like, all of those to me are really lovely principles.
Yes.
It runs into this other issue then about but what does that mean in this particular circumstance?
Yeah.
But it's showing us that there's two commitments, I think, that run sort of headlong into each other. And so you've got competing values that have to be adjudicated in some way or another.
Bobby, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I really had slipped into, we're talking about inheritance. That sure sounds like ownership.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we're talking about the messy intersection of this divinely ordained system and humans and human mortality and human systems of organizing ourselves and human, laws and we're trying to figure out how to make this idea work within a human system, and it's complicated.
Yeah. Amy, this reference to the Jubilee in verse 4 is kind of confusing. It doesn't actually seem quite to square up, at least in my mind, with the Jubilee law in Leviticus 25. I don't know that it's really worth, this is something that I think puzzles scholars as well. And so I don't know that it's really worth unpacking too far, but that reference to Jubilee is, I think, important. I just don't quite know what to do with it. Do you have any help there?
I mean, I can tell you the sort of simple-minded way that I understand it, but I'm sure it is much more complicated than that. what I know of what the biblical text says is that if you sell your land,
Right.
in the Jubilee year, it goes back to that ancestral, tribal holdings.
Right.
I don't think that it says anything about what would happen in this situation.
I think that's right.
Where it has, because it's not envisioning this situation. So it's sort of like the daughters of Zelophehad have brought up this case where it's like, you didn't think about this when you put together the law. And God says, oh yeah, you're right. We should do what they're saying. And then and then there's like yet another part of that, like, but wait, if we do that, then what about this other principle that we're in conflict with? So it's just this constant sort of iterating, negotiating between all, these original principles that have been set forth.
I like that, because then what you're sort of saying is they're just saying that this doesn't quite square with Jubilee law, and you haven't thought all the way through. Because Jubilee says the land in the 50th year reverts back to the original tribe.
Yeah.
And so the Jubilee on the face of it seems in this case that it would be when the 50th year comes, it would go back to the tribe of Zelophehad. And so no problem. But what they're saying is at the Jubilee, it's going to go to the tribe of the husbands. So I think there's a question here about how does one apply Jubilee law?
Right. Yeah. How does one apply Jubilee law in this case? If Jubilee seemed to be envisioning a situation where you've sold your land.
Yeah.
And this is not a situation of selling your land, but it is a situation of the land transferring from one tribe to another.
Yes.
It hasn't been addressed.
Yeah. That's helpful. I appreciate it. All right. So the solution that is offered picks up then in verse 5. Then Moses commanded the Israelites according to the Lord's word. The tribe of Joseph's descendants are correct in what they are saying. This is the word that the Lord commands to Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry whomever seems best to them, but they may only marry into one of the clans of their ancestral tribe, so that the inheritance of the Israelites doesn't transfer from one tribe to another. The Israelites will each retain the tribal inheritance of his ancestral tribe. Every daughter who inherits land from an Israelite tribe must marry into one of the clans of her father's tribe. In this way, each Israelite will own the land of his ancestors. An inheritance of land may not be transferred from one tribe to another, for the Israelite tribes will each retain its own inheritance. Zelophehad's daughters did as the Lord commanded Moses. Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, Zelophehad's daughters, married their cousins. They married into the clan of Manasseh, Joseph's son. Their inheritance remained in the tribe of their father's clan. Okay, so I got a little confused at the beginning about who is actually responding. But this is, again, the Lord making this declaration through Moses. Is that how you read that?
It is, although for whatever reason, maybe I'm grasping at straws. I feel some difference with the last one. Moses brought the case to the Lord, and this is what the Lord said. And then it's like a quote from the Lord. And here it's like, yeah, Moses totally checked in with God, and this is what God,
right.
And then said this. And I'm like, did God really say that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes Moses, I don't know. This is so heretical, but sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure if Moses is. I'm thinking about the case with that, like right before that, I think 10 Commandments, I think, where God gives Moses this sort of general command to that the men should purify themselves and await this revelation. And Moses specifically tells them the men should stay away from women.
Yeah.
Which many interpreters have pointed out, that's an interpretation.
Yeah.
That's not exactly what God said. So I don't know how that would apply here, but I wonder if there's any wiggle room. In any case, it says, all the text tells us is that Moses said this at the Lord's bidding. So I guess we should just.
That's interesting, because that's exactly the same question that I was sort of raising in my own mind was, is this Moses's kind of best interpretation of what God is commanding in this situation, or is this thus saith the Lord?
Yeah, right.
And I also want to read it as Moses's interpretation, which is just interesting to me to observe that you and I both kind of want to go that way.
Question that a little bit.
Can you say a little bit about because that's sort of where you land, it seems like there's something troubling about this conclusion or the solution. Can you talk a little bit about the way that seems troubling?
I mean, I think it's just, as what's troubling to me almost more than like, okay, now there's a smaller pool of people that they can marry, is just this sort of explicit raising up or recognition that maybe would have been obvious to an ancient person and would not have been obvious to me, that in the next generation, not even the next generation, as soon as you get married, that land belongs to your husband.
Right.
And so your status as an independent, autonomous person who can have property goes away.
Right.
That's really what bothers me. I mean, that they have a limited pool of people to marry. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, how many? You just need one.
Yeah.
I know. I'm like, what if they don't get married at all, Moses? You put that option in there? No, that was not a common option in the ancient world.
No, I mean, first of all, it's probably worth saying in this context that marrying your cousin was actually the ideal marriage.
Yeah.
In ancient Israel, at least for part of the history. And so you think of stories about, Abraham going back to, or sending his servant back to his ancestral land, or Jacob going back to his ancestral land to find a cousin to marry. And so it sounds weird to us to say they married their cousins.
Right.
But it was not at all weird.
This wasn't weird.
Ancient world. This was sort of standard practice, even ideal practice.
I feel like in our time, it would be like you married someone from your hometown.
Right, exactly.
So now you're not going to argue about where you spend Thanksgiving because you're going to be in your hometown.
Yeah, you just go to one place for lunch and one place for supper. Yeah.
Right, you can do everything all the time.
Yeah, they married somebody from their hometown. Somebody they went to high school with. I like that. I think that's a good interpretation. I do appreciate what you're raising, which is one could imagine other solutions to this problem, right? So we just had a text in the Tamar story, which was raising this issue about levirate marriage, and the husband, the father of the child does not necessarily have to be the sort of legal father of the child. And so you can attribute a child to a different father. Like, there are ways that one could imagine working out that sort of law so that the daughters of Zelophehad's children still belong to their clan of their grandfather, to Zelophehad's tribe, rather than there are other solutions one could work out, as you were saying, but this is the one. I mean, those get really complicated.
They get really complicated. No, you're right. I feel like this is sort of this is a way of like containing pretty tightly what has actually been changed in the system. They're not suddenly saying like, well, maybe once you have property, you don't actually need to marry because you can grow your own darn food and you could, we're not going there.
Right.
We're not going there.
I think that's right. And I mean, to me, that goes back to the moving of the needle that you were talking about earlier, that this is like we've made incremental progress within an overarching patriarchal system. These particular women have, I think, really done something important and standing up for their rights and the rights of their father. And they've made a change. They've made a difference. And also it's a difference of limited scope.
Right. It's a good reminder that it takes a lot. It takes a lot of groups of sisters or whoever who are going to bring up every time the system is not working in order to get enough incremental change, that you can start pulling down some of these bigger things.
Yeah.
It takes a lot.
For whatever reason, what you just said reminded me of a story from my old seminary, Columbia Seminary in Atlanta, that when women first started being ordained in the Presbyterian church that seminary belongs to, the women students would bring cowbells to the theology class. Mm-hmm. And every time the theology professor, I think was Shirley Guthrie at the time, his name is Shirley, he's a man, would say something sort of patriarchal, they would ring their cowbells. And so it was like this women's solidarity of like every single time something happens, we're going to like make a statement about it.
Wow.
Until things change. That just got really real for me, Bobby. That kind of gave me like,
goosebumps. Because that is we hear all the time, rightfully so, from people of all kinds of different minority groups, that they don't want to have to be the police all the time. Like they need, that's a really big burden to ask someone to carry. And so, that's on us as allies, and the different ways we can be allies in the world, not to just make, the group that is being harmed be the ones to speak out. And also sometimes we don't see it until someone shows us, and so.
That's exactly right.
Wow, cowbells. That's amazing.
I'm glad my students don't do that to me. I try very hard, but me being who I am, there are some limitations to my perspective about things. And so I would probably get cowbelled at least.
It is really tough.
Once a day.
I mean, I would get cowbelled. That's.
So what this text has managed to do is allowed the daughters of Zelophehad to carry on their father's legacy. And then it has also allowed the land to stay within the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's these sort of two values that have been linked together in this way. And it has resulted in the limitations of the right of the women to sort of marry who they want. So that's kind of the trade-off here as I see it. Does that sound right?
Yes, that sounds right. And at least before they marry, it recognizes women as a viable landowner.
Yeah.
Which I don't know that was the case before this.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And also that women's voices here are being heard by not only the men in the story, but also by God and valued. That's important too.
Yes, there was no response from Moses or God or the chieftains or the elders or anyone that said, you don't have standing.
Right.
The women had standing.
You are right. Yep. So the daughters get named again here. I don't know, like just the repetition of their names just seems so important to me, as we were saying, given the lack of women's names in the biblical text as a whole. You could have just called them Zelophehad's daughters, but we actually name them again. I don't know what to say about that other than that, but is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, this is probably a weird detail, but I'm looking to see if the order's different.
Oh, interesting.
I almost like it more that the order is different, because it's not just they were known as a unit and this is the unit and they always go in this order, but like the names of these women are known.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to make of it other than it is important. These were specific people who did this specific thing.
Yeah.
And so we get to remember them.
Yeah, I love that, Amy. And if it were just like they were listed from oldest to youngest or whatever, then you would have another hierarchy.
That's how I had assumed, honestly. I hadn't noticed before that it's in a different order. I had assumed the first time that they were listed oldest to youngest.
Yeah, but Noah is listed last
real
here.
Reason.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. And then so, like here we have this sort of names of women are being given in a non-hierarchical fashion. Like there's something really beautiful and feminist about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that.
We get one more reference to the daughters of Zelophehad, which is not in our official reading for today, but it's over in Joshua 17, verses 3 and 4. The Numbers text is set while the Israelites are still in the wilderness before they enter the land. So here's what's going to happen when you get to the land. The Joshua text is written from now we're in the land. And so 17, 3 and 4 in the book of Joshua just says, Zelophehad was Hepher's son, Gilead's grandson, Machir's great-grandson, and Manasseh's great-great-grandson. Zelophehad had no sons, only daughters, who were named Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. The daughters approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua, Nun's son, and the leaders. They said, the Lord commanded Moses to give us a legacy along with our male relatives, so in agreement with the Lord's command, they were given a legacy along with their uncles.
Yeah.
So I was just reading that as like, and so it happened. They actually did what they said they were going to do.
They actually did what they were going to say.
Which is important.
Yep. The women followed up and the leader said, yep. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious when they say in the CEB, the Lord commanded Moses to give us a legacy. What does the JPS have there?
The JPS has, the Lord commanded Moses to grant us a portion among our male kinsmen.
The reason that I was bringing that up is because here it actually sounds like they receive something that is theirs, which was a little more muted in the earlier text.
Yeah.
But maybe
you're
it
right.
just ends up being theirs for a moment and then going on to someone else. I don't know if that makes any difference or not, but it did stand out to me just there.
Yes, it stands out to me too. And maybe part of it is just that, like, I recognized at the time that they were making their case that they really couched the whole thing in terms of the legacy of their father. Like, this is how
Right.
you honor our father. And that probably was important at that time. And now we see in the next generation, you can drop that part of the language,
Yeah.
And just get to, we're supposed to have a portion alongside our male kinsmen. Yeah. And then hopefully, in generations to come, we can go a little farther.
I really love that. That's actually the shifting of the Overton window, right? You like take something that seems radical and you make it seem not radical. And then you can push a little further and a little further. So I really like that by the end of this story, we get to a normalization of what had to be very carefully couched in the original telling.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's pretty wild, Bobby, that this incident is mentioned 3 times.
3 times.
In the biblical text. And all 5 women are named 3 times.
Every time, yeah.
And every time it is, affirmed, the general ruling is affirmed, and, the middle time it's sort of couched in some other stuff. But that's pretty big.
That is really big. And it also, the way this story ends is it sort of leaves behind that issue of who do they marry, and it just ends with them having an inheritance among their uncles.
Yes.
Which presumably maybe they did marry and whatever, but the story's not bringing us back to that. It's bringing us back to they inherited along with the rest of their family.
Yeah.
All right, Amy. Well, that is the threefold story of the daughters of Zelophehad as told in Numbers and Joshua. There's a whole lot, I think, that you could bring to connect to today. I'm just curious where your head is as we end this conversation.
Bobby, reading this story reminded me of this poster that I had in my office for many years when I worked at a synagogue that was founded by the gay and lesbian community that listed the year in which various rights, all related to women's sort of autonomy, came into being. And so it had, when women could vote, but it also had like when was birth control legal and when could women get their own credit that wasn't in the name of their husband, or when was sort of rape recognized as a thing that could happen within the context of marriage. And it had the years for all of these. And then at the bottom, it had same-sex marriage with a question mark. Like, when is this? When are we going to get there? And it was shocking to me all the time. That's why I hung this in my office, how recent some of these things were. Like, I remember looking at it and thinking, like, when my parents got married, my mom could not have credit that wasn't attached to my father. And that is insane to me.
Yeah.
And it was both really sobering and also really encouraging to me at like the hardest moments of that fight for marriage equality, that like things do change, even if like this very tiny window within which I've been alive, it seemed like we already were at the peak of this, equality mountain or whatever it was I thought we were at this point. Now we're taking things back off the list. So that's a whole, we'll make a different poster for that. But I think I thought of that poster because this is not a perfect story. Like, it doesn't go all the way where I want it to. And then that second section in chapter 36 kind of like dulls some of the what I thought was the success of 27. And so part of me wants to be really upset about that. And of course, like that that sense of injustice is exactly the agitation that we need to continue bringing the cases forward. That's real and important. But it keeps it, I guess, hopeful for me, that context, that change does happen. It is horrifying that some of these issues have not been worked out yet, weren't worked out at that time, and are still not worked out. But it is worth continuing to fight. Like, the fight is not over.
Yeah.
The fight's not over. And so we have things to do, and so we cannot give up both of those. And that's what the daughters of Zelophehad remind me.
Yeah, I really love that, Amy. I would echo all of that, although I would not have said it so well. And I think, to me, there's also just a theological observation to make here that, I mean, it's true in both of our communities in various places that the status of women in the religious community is understood in various ways across the diversity of both Judaism and Christianity. And here, one of the things I really love about this text is that these 5 women come forward and make their statement, not asking the question. They make a claim about the way things should be. And that one line where, God's sort of first line in the text, which is, Zelophehad's daughters are right in what they are saying. And, in a community that sometimes argues for reasons that are unclear to me about the legitimacy of women's voices, the legitimacy of women's leadership, the legitimacy of women's claims in the religious and in the civil context, here's just God saying, yep, I overlooked that. You are exactly right. The solution you offered is the right solution. So let's do that. That affirmation to me just seems really important, kind of its own accord. And that this text, which is patriarchal in many ways, is able to recognize that legitimacy even here.
Yes, with no sense of like being threatened, or no sense of whether they have standing to speak, or no sense of whatever, just to like, let's just hear them out. And then God says, yeah, you're right.
Yep. And then it gets reaffirmed in 36, and then it gets reaffirmed in Joshua 17. Like, there's never any question about whether that original claim that they made was a legitimate claim to make.
I like it, Bobby.
Me too. I love this text. I don't think I've ever actually interpreted this text in any kind of way. So I've enjoyed talking about it with you.
Yeah, me too.
So next week, the series will continue on with a look at Rahab in Joshua 2 and a little bit of Joshua 6. That one's a pre-recorded episode that we did back in the fall sometime.
I love Rahab. I know you say Rahab and I say Rahab. I love her.
Rahab is so much more beautiful than Rahab, but I just can't retrain you.
You can't undo your training. I gotcha.
Yeah. All right, Amy, thanks for this conversation. Have a great week.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced by Bobby Williamson and edited by Joel and Laura Becker. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for helping to make this podcast possible.
Join us next time when we'll continue our summer series on the women of the Hebrew Bible with the story of Rahab, as told in Joshua 2, 1-24 and 6, 22-24. Until then, keep on digging.